Silvarum by Dean Kuhta. Narrated by Dan Bottomley. Chapter 7. Log Entry 377. Your dad isn't on a trip for work. The girls remained silent, staring at their mother. The whole thing is rather complicated, said Trelinia. I'm just going to start from the beginning and try my best. I've never had to tell this entire story before, so please be patient with me, okay? Mackenzie and Marie nodded their heads in unison. The golden candlelight illuminated their perplexed expressions. Where should I begin? She said as she shuffled in her chair. The Woods and Drake families have, shall we say, a type of ability that other families don't. Everyone back to your great-great-grandmother, that's 5 generations ago, have all possessed these skills. The women and men from both sides of the family, Drake being my side and the Woods line being your dad's. What kind of ability? Asked Marie. All different kinds. Some of us have a heightened sense of awareness in certain situations. Others can perform processes that generate a beneficial outcome. And even others can exhibit exceptional physical feats that are above and beyond the ordinary individual. Come on, Mum, exclaimed Mackenzie. You're talking about magic. Yes, dear, I'm talking about magic. The sisters looked at each other and smiled. All the members of the Woods and Drake families, for the past 5 generations, have had a particular magical power of some kind or another. But we know this, replied Mackenzie. Marie is already proficient with magic, and I've been using healing spells for a few years now. Even Roger has his outlandish talents with technology and science. And that's wonderful, Mackenzie. Believe me when I tell you that I know exactly what you 3 have been studying because I've been following your progress. But what do you know about my abilities? Or your father's abilities? Or even your Uncle Brian's magic? Dad's abilities? Asked Marie. What type of magic can he do? Probably the most unusual of all of us, replied Trelinia as she cleared her throat. Your dad can see and communicate with people who've passed over into the spirit world. He can even travel into their unseen realm. You mean ghosts? Asked Mackenzie. Yes. Travelling into their dimension is more complicated than a normal spell, but he can go there and interact with them. Is he there now? Asked Marie. Not exactly, but you're pretty close. We'll get back to the details of your dad's journey soon, but first I want to talk with the 2 of you about these abilities and why you have them. Trelinia sighed and shook her head in frustration. We should have communicated to you children about your magical abilities much earlier in your lives than this, but we've been putting it off. For that, I apologise. Your dad and I have come up with every excuse in the book to justify not addressing the situation. We're guilty of hoping the problem would go away if we just ignored it. What problem? Asked Mackenzie. Their mother gazed into the candlelight. The girls stared at her with anxious anticipation. The problem of the runestones, she replied. The runestones! Cried Mackenzie. I knew it. Trelinia chuckled. I wouldn't get so excited about them if I were you. The runestones are a dangerous business and should be taken seriously. I do take them seriously, she replied. Mackenzie jumped out of her chair and ran back to the foyer to retrieve her backpack. Marie looked at her mother and shrugged. The 2 sat and waited patiently until the sound of Mackenzie's footsteps clamoured back down the hallway. Look, Mum, she said as she flew back into her chair and held out an object wrapped in cloth. This is what I found in the graveyard. It's one of the magic runestones. What graveyard? Asked Marie. One moment, dear, said Trelinia. Let me take a look at this stone your sister found, and then I'll tell you about that. She held the stone and bounced it up and down. Trelinia nodded to herself and then closed her hand, gripping it tight for a moment. The girls watched intently as she opened her palm and flipped the stone over with her other hand. She studied the 3 small symbols inscribed on its surface. "This is not a runestone," said Trelawney. "But Mrs. Roberts said it was," replied Mackenzie. "Of course she did. That's what she's supposed to say." Mackenzie frowned. "What in the world are you talking about? Why would she lie to me?" "The runestones aren't something you can just snatch up on a leisurely weekend stroll and run back home with. They're protected by powerful forces. Sometimes they're guarded and watched over by peaceful beings, but this time they're not. In fact, all the runestones are back in the hands of dangerous and evil powers. And that's the problem." "How many of these runestones are there?" asked Marie. "There's a picture at school that shows only one of them." "There are 8 runestones in total," replied their mother. "The others are called companion stones. That's what you have here, Mackenzie. They're sort of like clues or guides for finding their parent stones. The parent stones are the ones that possess real power." "Well, that sucks," said Mackenzie. "I really thought that I'd found an actual runestone. All that work for nothing." "What did you mean when you said that Mrs. Roberts was supposed to say that this was a runestone, when in fact it sounds like she knew it's not?" asked Marie. "That's an excellent question," replied Trelawney. "She told you that this is a runestone because she, and everyone else, didn't want you or your sister and brother or any of your friends to go off on some crazy quest to try and find the real ones." "Why?" asked Mackenzie. "Because of the extreme danger involved. Do either of you have any idea of the threats that are lurking just outside the borders of Thorndale?" Mackenzie looked at Marie. "Sure we do. We kind of have an idea, right?" Marie nodded. "There's the Blackwood Forest and those giant spiders Roger and I saw 2 summers ago. And then there's that creepy graveyard that I went into last weekend." "Is that it?" asked their mother. Trelawney rubbed her forehead and thought for a few moments. "Look, girls, the reason you don't know anything else is that your dad and I, and a few others in town, have tried very hard throughout your lives to keep it that way. Part of the reason is that's our role as your parents, but mostly it's because we didn't want you to have to do what we did when we were your age. We'd hoped that it wouldn't have to come to that again, but as life has a way of surprising you when you're least prepared, it seems that history is on the verge of repeating itself." "All right," said Mackenzie. "You're going to have to be specific and tell us what it is that you're going on about. What is it that you guys did when you were our age? Out with it." Trelawney chuckled. "Well now, that's precisely the sort of attitude that your father and I have always been afraid of. But you're right. Both of you deserve to know the truth. So here it is. There are 8 runestones," said Trelawney. "Frost, fire, light, shadow, technology, nature, life, and death. Hundreds of years ago, in 1184, my great-great-great-grandfather, Dr. Edric Drake, first discovered their existence during an archaeological expedition in a distant mountain range, far to the north, called the Shadow Mountains. His 9-person team of archaeologists, scientists and geologists were there to conduct research and collect data about the natural resources of that desolate Arctic region. They expected to find a bunch of minerals and metals and other useful substances, which they did, but they also found something else buried in the ice and permafrost. They found the ruins of an ancient civilization within the depths of an evil and hideous city. For weeks, Edric and his team explored the ruined monuments, hallways and marble rooms of that dreadful metropolis. They'd become so obsessed with their discovery that they abandoned their previous project." Trelawney took a sip of water and thought for a moment before she continued. During that time, the team had been documenting and recording all their discoveries and findings, as proper scientists should. They catalogued and drew diagrams of every building, street and room that they encountered. They were even relaying their data back home at least once a day. The team made detailed descriptions of the bizarre architecture, the surreal artwork, and inscribed pages and pages of data regarding frightful spells and mysterious incantations. That's when the runestones were first found. They'd exhumed a burial chamber, deep within the bowels of the city, that contained 8 large coffins laid out in a square in the middle of the room. On the lid of each coffin was encased a runestone. This discovery was phenomenal, obviously, but they were still unable to decipher or understand any of the ancient writing or symbols on the stones, or in the many books they'd discovered. That's until they found the Watcher's Pyramid. "The what?" asked Mackenzie. The Watcher's Pyramid is what they called it. It was a stone monument in the centre of the city that contained 4 languages carved into its sides. There was one language on each face, and they all recited the same thing. Because one of the passages was understood by a team member who studied ancient languages, it enabled them to decipher the texts they'd found and then the runestones. This was the moment when the team began to make real progress. All of these stunning developments were being transmitted to their associates back home. Scientists, archaeologists, philosophers, and everyone else in the scientific community were all going wild with excitement. An entirely new civilization had been discovered in a region of Silvarum that was, up until that stage, deemed inhospitable to life. At some point soon after that, about a month after they had first discovered the ancient city, all communication with the team was lost. Dead silence. No more data transfers, letters by ship, nothing. The team had completely vanished. "Did anyone go back to look for them?" asked Marie. "Yes," she replied. "A year later, in fact. As you might imagine, there was a lot of commotion and drama after they lost all communication with the team. For many months, the people back home debated and argued about whether to send another expedition to find out what had happened." "Why would they debate it?" asked Mackenzie. "Wouldn't they just go up there right away as soon as they lost contact?" "You'd think so, yes," replied Trelinia. "That would have been sensible. The reason they didn't immediately race up there was due to the incredibly disturbing nature of the team's final messages. To be frank, the people back home who were listening to these daily transmissions were frightened." Marie felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "What do you mean?" "It's difficult to explain it in my own words. The concepts are rather technical. It'll be easier and make more sense if I just show you. I'll be right back." Trelinia got up from the table and left the room. Marie looked at her sister. Mackenzie's expression was filled with confusion and anxiety. "What are you thinking?" "I'm not sure. This is way more complicated than I ever imagined, and to be honest with you, I'm not really excited about where this story is going." "Me neither," replied Marie. Trelinia walked back into the room and placed a massive book onto the table. It produced a thump upon the mahogany surface, expelling a puff of dust from its ancient pages. As she opened it, Marie observed a curious design on the cover. It was made of 2 overlapping circles that formed a lidless eye. "Here we are," Trelinia said as she turned to one of the first pages. It was a table of contents. She ran her finger down the list of passages as she read them aloud one by one. "Drake Expedition, Jan 13, 1184. Base Camp Provisions, Jan 17. Initial Survey and Core Samples, Jan 21. Copper and Nickel Findings, Feb 2. Cave Exploration." Trelinia tapped her finger on a passage at the bottom of the page. "April 21. Runestone Translation, page 610. She lifted a swathe of pages and flipped them over in one go. That put her on page 588. She licked her thumb and quickly flipped through the remainder of the pages and began to read the entries aloud. All the log entries that I'm about to read were originally transcribed from audio transmissions sent daily by Dr. Edric Drake. All right, here we go. Entry 371, April 21, 1834. As recorded in journal entries 89 through 90, the WM, edit, Watcher's Pyramid, has enabled Professors Moulton and Eldridge to successfully transcribe pages 735 through 887 of volume 465p. This was the volume that was discovered in tomb 87b on February 11. The resulting incantations, read aloud by myself in burial chamber 41 and observed by Professor Dwyer, have thereby resulted in the subsequent unlocking of the mysterious mechanism that constrained the runestone on coffin 01. It should be noted that a significant energy phenomenon, in the form of electrostatic discharge, was observed from the remaining 7 stones upon removal of the stone 01A. Entry 372, May 3, 1122. With the assistance of Dr. Carell, I've been successful in extracting the remaining 7 runestones, 02A, 03A, 04A, 05A, 06A, 07A, 08A, from each of their mechanical housings. This was accomplished by the complete transliteration of volume 465p. Moulton and Eldridge have been working straight through the night for the past few days to accomplish this formidable task, and I'm certain that they're in need of some much-deserved rest. As a matter of fact, I believe they're both sound asleep in the next tent as I record this journal entry. Another important observation worth documenting is that once all the runestones were removed from their casings, Professor Dwyer reported that a previously undocumented object had been seen within the southwest district of the city. Furthermore, the object appeared to demonstrate the ability to hover and spin in mid-air. We're planning to investigate these peculiar mechanics tomorrow, once we all get a little more sleep and food. Entry 373, May 5, 0259. The floating structure that was previously mentioned, hereafter referred to as R71X, was in fact hovering and spinning above the surface of Courtyard 17B in District 13. Its rate of rotation was calculated to be 8 revolutions per minute. A group of us, which included Professors Dwyer and Eldridge, Dr. Carterson, and I, all observed this curious phenomenon. Contrary to our current understanding of the laws of gravity, R71X didn't exhibit the usual characteristics of matter in three-dimensional space. The object itself is composed of 16 individual tetrahedrons and 32 triangular faces, 24 edges, and 8 vertices. These are characteristics of objects that conform to 4-dimensional geometry, and the group is obviously confused as to how it can exist in our reality of 3 dimensions. Professor Eldridge posited that R71X might be held airborne by an unseen and unheard propulsion system within its interior. Magnetism was another theory considered. Unfortunately, we're unable to observe with a reliable level of accuracy any such system of propulsion, whether through visual or auditory observations. What we could observe on R71X, however, were the 9 symbols evident on its triangular faces 20 through 29. The symbols, at least 8 of them, appear to correlate to the 8 symbols carved into each of the runestones found in Chamber 41. The 9th symbol on face 29 is yet to be deciphered. It's been designated as rune 01B. Professors Moulton and Eldridge will continue to analyse it in an effort to understand its meaning and relation to the other 8 runestones. Entry 374, May 5, 1318. Tragic news. Professor Moulton has died. During the analysis of rune 01B, what appeared to be a grievous accident occurred while they were studying the object. Professor Eldridge reported that R71X displayed a matter transference while Professor Moulton was in its proximity. Our 71X transformed instantaneously, according to Professor Eldridge, from a 16-cell hexadecacoron polytope to a 24-cell icosahedrocoron. The result of this matter transition engulfed Professor Moulton, and he was lost inside the structure. We're postponing all research for the time being to ascertain the cause of this horrible accident and to try and understand the physics involved. I'll be notifying Professor Moulton's next of kin immediately." "Mum," said Marie, "I don't understand what he's talking about. How did the man die?" "I still don't really understand all of this technical stuff either. And I've had this book since I was your age. What I've learned is that this floating object they found was able to change its shape in the blink of an eye. This poor fellow, Moulton, was just too close to it when it changed." "You're saying that thing sucked him up somehow?" asked Mackenzie. "Well, that's one way to put it. A more accurate way of explaining it would be to say that his state of matter phased with the structure. In a sense, he became part of it, kind of like when you drop an ice cube into a glass of warm water. The solid water of the ice cube will melt and change into a liquid, merging with the rest of the water in the glass." "You mean Moulton turned into water?" asked Marie. "Of course not," she replied. "Just let me continue. I haven't even got to the bad parts yet." "Oh my," said Mackenzie. "Wait a second, Mum," said Marie. "I just realised how bad I have to go to the bathroom. Can we please take a break?" "Of course. I have to go as well." "Me too," said Mackenzie. They jumped up out of their chairs and raced to separate bathrooms. When everyone finally returned, Trelania commenced with her narration. Entry 375, May 5, 2051. Professor Moulton was buried in an icy grave on the western ridge. Since we didn't actually have his remains, we elected to bury some of his most cherished possessions. It was a morose occasion, as most of the team had known and worked with the good man for many years. We're all disheartened by the loss. He is survived by his wife and 5 children. No one is in the mood to conduct research today. We'll see about tomorrow. Entry 376, May 8, 0855. The team's spirits have been lifted substantially by the discovery of a completely different area of study from what we've been obsessed with over the past few weeks. Dr. Mulgrew, the team's senior geologist, has discovered a thick deposit of diamonds near the base of the eastern ridge. A multitude of volcanic rocks and lamproites have been excavated and have thus yielded fine specimens. Even gold has been found. The entire team is now focused solely on this unexpected turn of events. This is, after all, the real purpose of our expedition. Since the death of Professor Moulton, interest in the further study of the ancient city has faded. We've requested that future expeditions take over the research from where we left off. In any event, we're more focused on the gemstones and the party of sorts that has been planned this evening to celebrate our newfound breakthrough. Entry 377, May 10, 0338. I record this journal entry with my sanity in doubt. I'm not certain as to what I've just witnessed, yet for the sake of keeping a record of these disturbing events, I'll attempt to articulate the details in as clear and unemotional a manner as humanly possible. I'm confident that I'll fail at this task. During the night, Professor Moulton returned to the camp. At least, something that appeared to be Professor Samuel Moulton returned. As we were all celebrating our recent discovery of the gemstones, standing outside our tents and talking to one another, a faint figure approached us slowly from the southeast. Since all remaining team members were present and accounted for, we were immediately frightened and reacted defensively. Captain Stevens, who was always carrying a sidearm, attempted to confront the intruder. As the figure approached the glow of our lamplight, however, we were all stupefied by the appearance of our departed colleague, Professor Moulton. He looked completely normal at that point. Dr. Susan Dexter, God rest her soul, was the first person to call out what she believed to be her old friend. I recollect her final words being something along the lines of, "Sammy, you're okay. You survived," or something of that nature. The sequence of events that followed was too fast and confused to completely register, yet their imagery will be burned into the fabric of my thoughts for the remainder of my living days. The figure of Professor Moulton turned toward Dr. Dexter and propelled a geometric shape, somewhat similar in form to R71X, into her chest. She disappeared. I'm unable to explain in words the physics of the action as it moved and spun through the night air, let alone the visual dynamics of the object itself. Nonetheless, I can and will always remember the dreadful sound that Dr. Dexter made when she was absorbed into that illogical shape. I refuse, however, to inscribe a description of those sounds into words here. Captain Stevens immediately screamed and fired at the figure of Professor Moulton. The bullets, instead of penetrating his body or missing him entirely, appeared to freeze in place. They orbited his torso in the form of a bright accretion disk of light. Moulton then instantly transported himself directly onto the form of Captain Stevens. Again, there were the ghastly sounds. I can't explain it any clearer than that. One moment Moulton was standing in one spot with the disk of light orbiting him, and the next he was instantly standing in the locations of Captain Stevens. At this point, everyone went into a crazed panic. People were running in all directions, some into their tents and others out into the snowy darkness. I simply froze, unable to move or scream. I watched in horror as the image of Moulton, who stared straight at me, transformed from his human form into a geometric shape of preposterous dimensions, and then proceeded to fold in on itself and vanish. I'm aware that my words are inadequate in communicating these illogical events. Unfortunately, I'm now exhausted and have no energy. I can barely keep my eyes open and my thoughts together. My head is now hurting terribly, and I see strange things, numbers, shapes, colours. I must find sleep. Trelinia looked up from the book and peered into the faces of her daughters. Marie stared with sadness, while Mackenzie held an expression of anger. "That was awful," said Marie. "All those poor people." "I know, dear," replied their mother, "but it's important that both of you hear exactly what happened next. These last few log entries will explain everything."